Yeah.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to staff meeting Tuesday, January the 6th. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy New Year. Good to see everybody. Got a couple things on the agenda today. Tom, take it away.
We have two things, and these are public discussions on things we've been working on for a while, but this purpose of today is to kind of give the commission an update on where these projects are at. Colonel White is here from the Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff's under the weather, so he sent Colonel White over to talk about the joint hangar between the Kansas Highway Patrol and the Sheriff's Department, which we've been discussing for 2 or 3 months. So Colonel White will give some information, and then I think Lindsay will kind of talk about some finance ends of that and some policy decisions for the commission to consider for a future meeting to take some action. And then the second update is Chantel's here from ComCare to kind of give us an update on the Second Light construction project and the role of the county within that building to take on a mental health and be part of a physical health component within the building. So, and then have commission ask questions on that too as well. Again, no decisions today, just kind of updates on projects. So good. With that, Colonel White, I turn it over to you, sir, to talk about the hangar.
Hey, Colonel, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Wanted to talk about air support for our community, what that looks like, and why a hangar in this community is so important. First of all, for decades, the Sheriff's Office has had an air section to transport prisoners from around the country to face judicial services here in Sedgwick County. We've spent quite a bit of time on ensuring that we have a good plan in place for our air section. Recently, we purchased a King Air 350 that has helped support that effort. That aircraft is at Jabara right now, and we rent space at that location. We don't have a dedicated hangar at that location. They move us around that facility. We have space that we can use, but we don't have dedicated space that we can use. Now, KHP, Kansas Highway Patrol, has spent a significant amount of money in the recent years to identify and purchase aircraft for the state. And in that effort, they looked at the entire state to identify what communities needed air support the most. And what they identified was Sedgwick County, Wichita area needed air support the most. And I'll talk a little bit about why they did that. First of all, air support can do things that troops on the ground simply can't do. Rapid search and rescue, suspect tracking, and I've been up in the helicopter. And I've been in law enforcement for 36 years. I can tell you that when we have air section support, it provides community safety in a way that, again, ground troops just simply can't do. And the technology that they put in these aircraft for Kansas Highway Patrol is state of the art. It's very impressive. Just to give you an idea of simply what that might look like is if you're tracking a fleeing vehicle or you're tracking a vehicle for surveillance on an investigation that you're involved in, you can identify a specific vehicle. The computer then begins to roll the video on that and then tracks that vehicle and the video automatically. And then you can communicate to the ground troops so that you have this joint effort. And it's very impressive. Thermal imaging, so that you can have nighttime operations. So again, tactical support, and then large events that we have in our community, where we bring in thousands of people. Having tactical support from the air is critical to the safety of the citizens that are attending these events. So KHP currently has a helicopter that's dedicated to this community and a fixed wing aircraft that's dedicated to this community. In our effort to help support Kansas Highway Patrol, They have a tactical flight officer program, which we have now dedicated one of our staff members, one of our deputies, and actually they start this week in that program where they will operate some of the equipment that I just discussed, while KHP pilot their aircraft. So that gives you a little bit of an idea, but they need an area where they can house their aircraft as well. And we began to have conversations with Kansas Highway Patrol about the common sense approach where we can have a joint effort and house our aircraft together. In addition to that, Kansas Highway Patrol has other aircraft from around the state, specifically in Hayes and Topeka. And if we have very large events or we need to bring in additional aircraft, this community is a hub now, and we can bring in other aircraft from around the state to support larger events or things that may occur here in our community that need additional aircraft support. So that's kind of a quick overview of why air support, Kansas Highway Patrol, and housing those units are so important here in our community.
Colonel, that's helpful. A couple questions on that before we get into the financial aspects of it. Where does KHP, where do they currently house and hangar out of?
They currently have their aircraft operations in a small airport just outside of Wichita, in Sedgwick County. I don't recall the name of the airport off the top of my head right now, but it's near Derby.
Cook Airfield. Got it.
There, yeah, that's correct. I'm sorry. Yeah, Cook Airfield. So I've been down there and I've seen the operations there, and they're excited about an opportunity to expand what they're currently doing. Just to touch on briefly what their plan is to grow what they currently have. Their hope is to have 7 flight crews, and then mechanics and support staff, and again grow their current staffing. So they're going to need to expand where they currently are.
Colonel, is there any risk that if we don't enter into a partnership on this, that air support would leave Wichita and Sedgwick County from KHP and locate somewhere else? And are we at risk of losing that air support? Or if for some reason we decide not to enter into a partnership on the hangar?
Unfortunately, yes. So there are other communities that are eyeing these resources and identifying a way where we can house these and have them very close to our community, right here for our community, so that there's a quick response. KHP obviously would like to put them in the most beneficial places, and this is the place that they want to be, but they also have to have a good foundation and resources present so they can do that.
My last question, how often is this KHP, the helicopter and plane, how often is it being used? Is this a weekly thing? Is this a monthly thing? How often is this being put into use here?
Every day.
Daily?
Yes.
Questions, Commissioner Blueball?
Thank you, Chairman. Colonel, I know you were on WPD whenever they had the helicopter, and Commissioner Meissner and I were on the city council whenever they voted to get rid of the helicopter. And, you know, a lot of the comments we got from staff was telling us we'd have drone utilization that would be able to do what the helicopter has done. I know WPD is doing great things with the drones now, but there's still a gap in what that WPD helicopter did. How do you feel about the utilization of this and be able to kind of bridge that gap in between what we used to have on WPD had a helicopter and getting rid of it?
Certainly. Yeah. So we have drones and they're very beneficial. Some of them are small enough you can fly them into a home. So if we're in SWAT operations, we can actually fly a drone into a house. You can't do that, obviously, with these large aircraft. They don't have the speed capacity when we're talking about high-speed chases. The other thing is that we're fairly spread out. So if you need to move a resource across the county, you have to bring down a drone, you have to put it back up in the air. It's not practical. When you're talking about quick responses, I'll give you a quick example of that. If you have a shooting at a particular location, when I was with the Wichita Police Department, which you kind of mentioned earlier, there was an event where we had a robbery and an aggravated assault at a bar. And we were responding to that event, me and multiple units, when I was a sergeant. The helicopter got there before we did, and identified the suspect vehicle fleeing the scene, and we stopped it. So we worked with that air section. You can't do that with drone usage. So while drones have things that like I mentioned earlier, that the fixed wing aircraft or the helicopters can't do. Conversely, there are things that the drones can't do that these helicopters and fixed wing aircraft can do.
Good. Okay, Lindsay, would you be able to give us kind of the framework financially, what the request is or what the deal could look like, and then just give us all the financial metrics if you could.
Sure. So I think it's important to know the history too, on partially why this is happening. So my understanding is the Kansas Highway Patrol did approach the legislature about constructing a hangar. And at that time, it was just for their space. It was 18,000 square feet. And they had requested a $7.3 million facility. They also went so far as to get a letter of intent with the Wichita Airport Authority for space at Jabara. And that initial lease, I think, was going to be about $18,000 per year for that as well. Unfortunately, when they went to the legislature with that request, the legislature chose to instead give them an allocation of $650,000 in fiscal year 27. So July 1, 26 through June 30, 2027, for a third-party vendor. So making it very clear that instead of constructing a hangar, the legislature instead made it clear they wanted there to be a lease. So I think that's then where the common sense solution comes up, where we have a hangar space that we lease. I just learned today, excuse me, it's not dedicated space. And so what would have to happen is this would become a county facility under what we're proposing here. So we would need to go through a CIP amendment, and most likely we would need to figure out revised cost estimates. That 7.3 million again was over a year old now at this point, and also did not include the space that the sheriff's office would need, which we're estimating to be about 3,600 square feet. Just so you know, that 18,000 square feet that was originally proposed for Kansas Highway Patrol will include office space for their staff that will be their permanent work site, as opposed to our pilots who it will not be their permanent work site. So that's why we don't need as much space. Plus, in addition to that helicopter and fixed wing aircraft that Colonel White mentioned, they do want it to be an overflow site. So it would have space to be able to hold all of their aircraft in case there's a surge event where they're needed to be here for a while. So we would need to get that cost estimate revised as a part of the CIP amendment. You all would authorize that. And then we would most likely do bond funding for this, where we anticipate be at least $8 million. So that would go against the county's debt limit overall. Right now, there's plenty of capacity, but you do have, just keep in mind, you have more than $40 million worth of potential bond funded projects on your watch list at the moment. So those aren't even included on top of your ComCare Crisis Center, your Juvenile Community-Based Service Building, Regional Forensic Science Center, and those things that we've already discussed as well. And then, of course, we will need to make sure that whatever agreement is made with Highway Patrol, there is at least the majority of that annual debt service cost covered through that. And I will defer to Justin to speak to any of the risk with that. We do think there is obviously a slight risk that the legislature could choose not to fund that from year to year. So just know that at the end of the day, the county taxpayer is on the hook no matter what for that most likely 20-year debt service structure. We will have an offset, though. We do pay about $30,000 per year right now for the hangar space at Jabara. And so obviously that would go away and those costs could instead be turned to this. Obviously, because it would be on the county's capital improvement program, it would be something that our project services team would need to deal with. And then, of course, county finance would have the legwork to make sure that those debt payments are structured and set up, and the lease payments with the state work, and all of those hoops that the IRS requires we jump through from a taxability standpoint and all of that. So a lot of info.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
happy to answer any questions.
Okay, summarize. We build the building, the hangar, we bond fund it, and then we lease it. We enter into a lease agreement with Kansas Highway Patrol. They make us an annual or a monthly lease payment. Is that the
And
summary?
then we would also obviously need to figure out if there's going to be utility cost share or anything like that with them as well as a part of that lease.
And I might have missed it. Did we have an estimated total project cost yet?
No, we know it's the 7.3 million for 18,000 square feet. I think that brings us to right at 8 million if you then add in the 3,600 square feet. I do think it's worth noting that the estimate that was done on a pro bono basis. And so when we do it for cost, I will not be surprised if there's some differences when we spend more time getting the details and specs on that. I don't know. Let me see if it says on here. I'm sorry. I don't know. It was done on behalf of the Kansas Highway Patrol. This is a document that was produced by the Kansas Development Finance Authority. So I don't know who they used in order to get that.
Okay.
We would have to circle back with the state to understand that.
Yeah, Commissioner, that makes the most sense to me, but I can't speak definitively. Yeah.
But it's also a hangar, so I can't imagine it's
Sure.
going to be exorbitantly expensive.
Too complex. Hey, Justin, let's talk about the lease agreement. Lindsay had made a comment that we can enter into a lease agreement. We can ask for a guarantee, but it's not a ironclad guarantee that the legislature might one day decide not to fund this, which would be in bad faith, in my opinion. But there's no way in a lease agreement that you could tie this in contractually.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Justin Wagner, County Councilor. Couple points. First would be if we're talking standard language the state of Kansas uses in contracts, and virtually every contract I can think our office has entered into at the state has standard language. It's called a DA 146A form. It has language that specifically says that if in the judgment of the Director of Accounts, the state of Kansas, and the Department of Administration, within the Department of Administration, sufficient funds are not appropriated to continue the function performed in this agreement. So that means if the legislature doesn't allocate the funds each year or the chunk of funds that may be needed, and for payment of charges here under the state may terminate this agreement at the end of the current fiscal year. So that's a term and condition that they have in virtually every agreement. Now things can be negotiated. I want to manage expectations of the board that I can't think of a contract Sedgwick County has entered into that the state, now granted, they're usually grant agreements, but where the state has agreed to amend or take that language out. I believe they've indicated that it's required. We could obviously inquire further about that and see, because this would be being done essentially the county doing it on behalf of the state. So there may be some ability to get the state to grant a waiver or modification to that. So I think that's something we could look into. I think a lot of that comes down to really how much comfort does the board have in terms of the risk of that? Because I think you're right, Chairman. I think that if there was an agreement entered into with that standard language, the legislature should really fund this. It's both for the Kansas Highway Patrol's benefit and the sheriff's benefit, and the people in Sedgwick County in this area, in this region, if you're talking about Kansas Highway Patrol. And so you would hope they would follow through with it, but we couldn't guarantee it contractually unless they would alter that language. So that's something we could engage in. At this point, we haven't gotten that far. We're just talking about an MOU draft initially, which would just be the general outline. The agreement would come down the road later.
Okay, it's helpful. Other questions?
Lindsay, you mentioned a $30,000 figure, and you may have said this, but I'm just trying to wrap my arms around it. I'm trying to do the math here and figure out what's the sheriff currently paying for a lease? What's the highway patrol, and how close is that to making the bond payment? I'm trying to figure out what the shortfall is.
Sure. So it's $30,000 a year right now, just for the sheriff airplane.
Okay.
So that's part one of the equation. If let's say we estimate the $8 million right now with a 4% interest rate, it's probably slightly higher than that, but for every 1 million we bond, if it's 4%, we plan on $400,000 in interest payments over the life of that term. So 8 times 4, 3.2. So 8 plus 3.2 is our 11.2 million total cost figure. You divide that over 20, we're looking at debt service, I think around 600,000 a year. So we would need to make sure that we are getting at least 560,000 plus. We haven't even included utilities in those costs yet. And again, if there's folks operating out of that site 24/7, there will be some costs for that. Now, Tom Henry, I know, had mentioned that there are some concerns. We have to make sure that in order to not pay property taxes on this facility, that we can't just base the lease costs solely on the cost of the debt service per year. It has to be at a market rate. Otherwise, we run the risk of having to pay property taxes on this. So
It's not tax exempt already? from
I,
being the
Tom's
airport?
coming to the podium. I'm sure he's delighted that I've butchered this in some fashion. Obviously, I have, or he would not feel the need to come to the podium. So fix me, Tom.
So, Tom Henry, Assistant County Counselor. This is something that has not been addressed by the board, but in the case where you have like a religious entity requesting an exemption where they own the property and they're leasing it to somebody else, even if the other entity is using it for a religious purpose, the use by the lessor, you have to look at, for them, it's not necessarily the physical use. There can be an intangible use. And if it's deemed to be an investment purpose by the Board of Tax Appeals, then there's potential in those situations for that to nix the ability for that lessor to get an exemption. There's similar language in the statute that grants government entities the opportunity to get exemptions that it needs to be exclusively used for government purposes. But then it goes on to further define what government purposes are that allows a bit more than is allowed for the religious use, the educational use, and those types of things. So it's a bit of a gray area. I think there's good arguments to be made that we should still get the exemption since it is going to be the physical use is, there's no argument that that's governmental use. And then given some of the language in what is defined as a governmental use, it opens it up to maybe some proprietary uses as well. I think that there's some good arguments that we should get the exemption, but that's far from guaranteed. And that's voters' determination at the end of the day.
So are we not automatically sales tax exempt from the construction?
It's not
either?
sale. So this is property tax.
Right. But I guess I'm asking the same question.
From a sales tax exception, because it's a county facility that we're constructing, I would still imagine that we could issue the PEC and be exempt from sales tax. And likewise, our bond counsel has assured us that we can issue tax exempt bonds.
Okay.
But getting down to the implication on property tax, that's
Well, and there's a lot more things that can be included in the government exclusive use as a government entity. That includes some bonding and things like that. So I think some of it may depend on what the bonding looks like too. There's just a lot more that can be included in a governmental use exemption for property tax.
But we don't fall under the airport exemption since we're on the airport property.
So the land, I would imagine, is exempt for the city of Wichita.
So you're just exempt the land, not the.
So yeah, we would own the improvements and would have to get an exemption for the improvements.
At least we would own the improvements for 50 years. There is some question about whether the property would revert to the airport authority at the end of the ground lease.
Okay. And then one more question, the 30,000 we pay right now, does that include utilities or not?
Because there's really no folks who would office there, that is the only payment we make. So if they choose to apply that toward utilities, perhaps, but there's no additional costs on top of the 30,000 for it.
Chairman, I do want to make a comment. If we're using the standard state of Kansas attachment on this, something we may try to do if we weren't dealing with the state of Kansas, and we could try to again negotiate out of, would be to say if our exemption would be denied, we could make the other party responsible for it or have some sharing of costs. Their standard form says the state of Kansas would not take on any tax liability or agree to indemnify any other parties for tax liability. So again, if they don't vary from their standard language, if the exemption would not be successful, then we would be responsible for the taxes still on that. Just want to be clear on that issue as well.
Okay, that's helpful. Other question? Michelle?
I had some really great questions, but now I'm more confused than I was earlier. So just to be clear, we will not own the land, what you're saying. We will lease
It
the
will be a
land.
ground lease from the Wichita Airport Authority, much like what we do already for NCAT.
And is that a law that we can't own the land, or is there?
I believe it's
just
federal law that says that the airport authority, they have the jurisdiction and the responsibility.
I think that's correct. I can't cite the law for you, but I think Lindsay's correct.
just to make, I guess that
Right.
the sheriff's plane being housed there obviously is a benefit to the Sedgwick County organization, but the KHP being housed there is a benefit not just to us, but also to the community. And then let me just say, Wichita has probably the greatest interest in seeing that done, even maybe more than we would have. Is there any chance that they would be willing to make a deal on the land so that they can? I'm not sure what authority they have in terms of making that basically maybe a no-cost lease or one, inexpensive lease. They can make that forever if they want to, however long the law would allow. But it seems like they have an interest in making this deal happen.
I think it's important to note, we, Sedgwick County, have not yet had any conversations with Wichita Airport Authority. All of this has come through the conversations Kansas Highway Patrol had already had in their efforts to try and do this. So should the commission want to proceed with this, the next step would be to have an informal MOU that basically says it is our intent to move forward this with the hope of securing funding past this one single year. And at that point, we would then work with Wichita Airport Authority to transfer the letter of intent from Kansas Highway Patrol to us and figure out what all is involved. And so we could potentially negotiate at that time.
Can we at least clarify what their intent would be before we get to that? Seems like if we're saying it's our intent, but we have not got any commitment from Wichita on the airport authority on what their intent would be, seems like we're getting the cart before the horse a little bit.
So my understanding is when the Kansas Highway Patrol worked with them, they did secure that letter of intent. It was for a 50-year land lease at $18,000, about $430 a year.
Okay. You mentioned the bond payment would be around 600,000 per year.
If we structure it the way we typically do, that would be the annual average over 20 years. Yes.
So any operational costs that we would have in terms of utilities or maintenance or anything else that happens there would be additional.
Correct.
This building probably would have some offices, it would have some parts of storage, you probably have bathrooms and computers, and there's going to be some other costs there. It's not just a hangar.
So according to the information that we've been given, it's total 18,000 square feet. Of that, 30 by 120 of that is for the office space. And that would include those restrooms, I think a small kitchenette. Again, this is a 24/7 operation. So folks would obviously need the bathroom, obviously somewhere to heat up their lunch and those kinds of things.
And the entire hangar itself will probably be air conditioned and heated space as well.
I don't know that it actually is heated and cooled in the hangar. I think we had that conversation and I don't think we had to have it climate controlled except for the office portion.
I don't believe it is.
Okay.
I don't know that definitively, but I've been in it and it didn't feel like it. I can tell you that.
We've had a pretty mild season recently, so who knows when that happened. But I've worked in a lot of hangars in my lifetime, and usually when there's a lot of work happening in hangars, that is usually conditioned space. And so I would be surprised if there's going to be people stationed there, staff there that are maintaining, mechanicking, and these airplanes getting ready for daily flight that you're speaking of. It's going to end up being conditioned space, most likely, I would think. Very likely. I would be surprised if it wasn't. But if you're just simply storing an airplane, that's one thing, but that's not really what's happening here. This is a operational point. So I don't know. Anyway, I guess I'd like to see the conversation with Wichita happen sooner than later, to see whether or not there's some kind of a commitment we can get from them to lower the cost of this. I guess at $600,000 per year, what the legislature committed to this will really not cover the costs. They mentioned, you mentioned earlier their commitment for this last year was,
They've allocated 650,000
okay.
per year. Well, for 1 year, fiscal year 2027. Which I didn't even know they adopted a fiscal year 2027 budget, but they did apparently.
Okay, so at that price, again, assuming that on top of the 600,000, we would have utility costs, other operational costs. That 30,000 we're putting towards our own airplane today, plus their 650 may not cover the cost. That's what I'm trying to say. This may actually be an increase in our county commitment, or our yearly cost may go up by doing this.
It potentially could. But $80,000 a year, if we're only assuming some office space, would be, I do believe that I was told the hangar itself is not heated and cooled. And so if we're only paying for the office space, the operations and maintenance, I wouldn't imagine, at least in those first 10 or 15 years, would go beyond that in the course of a year.
Does this have to be at a Wichita Airport Authority site? I mean, I know Jabara is one, as well as the Eisenhower, but it sounds like it's already been decided it's going to happen at Jabara. That's
Tom, do you have any
It
insight?
does not have to be. When we talked about this 3 or 4, 5 months ago, they were talking with Textron and anybody that has a runway capacity. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the Wichita site, but it's my understanding, and commissioners can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Textron, that fell apart.
It was my understanding that Textron did not want to house this. Colonel, they had concern about transport of inmates. I think there was conversations sheriff had that they never walk into. They're always out on the tarmac. Textron did not want to entertain the conversation. So
That's correct, sir.
I just want to put this in here. The legislation for the approval of the 650,000 did call it for a lease to be at the Jabara Airport. So that is why they're pursuing it there now. That's not to say that can be changed into the future, but
I guess I'd be interested in that versus other, we mentioned Cook Airfield earlier. Obviously, the state was okay with that for their plane for a long time. That was essentially it's a private airport. It's a public airport, but it is the runway is much, much different there than it would be at Jabara. There's a number of other airports that are similar, and I would not want to miss the option, at least also looking at the flight line there at, what was Spirit Air Systems, so that they have had the NIR site over there has a lot of space and a runway as well. So I'm just wondering on the CIP, if we're going to really cast a broad net and say what's out there, what's available for us to take a look at. Again, if we can purchase the land, I would rather do that than have a lease at Jabara that simply has future problems. Go ahead.
I'll defer to Justin, but I have never heard of the ability to actually purchase ground at an airport. I know we had the conversation at Mid-Continent not too long ago about some of the hangars and some of the economic development activity that happens there. And I think there's a lot of federal law and regulation that goes into it. I doubt that we would be able to actually purchase property.
It isn't the best we could do with the city, give them to waive the lease cost.
Yes.
That's the best we could do.
Well, again, I'm not saying this is the right answer, but maybe they are leasing the space at Cook, but there are people who own those hangars at Cook.
Sure.
Those are purchased spaces.
I think that that's a different, because of how it's structured and set up and used, I believe they can have much greater autonomy over what they do than what we can do at either Jabara.
What I'm getting to is, what are the options for us rather than just this one lease at Jabara? What else is out there? If we're going to do a CIP, I want to cast a broad net and see if there's other places that would be interested in, maybe doing this differently.
I think we would have to make sure the legislature updates that before we would proceed. I think this is a fairly time sensitive need, and if the legislature is going to have a shorter session, I don't know what ability we will have to execute on that.
Okay. I guess that's what my questions. The only thing I'd say is I feel like we need more fiscal analysis, because I don't think we have all the answers to all the questions we've asked this morning. So
We do not have all the answers.
it's an interesting proposal. I'd like to get more data before I'm ready to make any.
Lindsay, could you expand a little bit on the time sensitiveness, like
So
what we're up against here as far as time?
my understanding is because this funding is in the fiscal year 27 budget, they are asking for an MOU now in order to continue to secure that funding. I think the time sensitivity that we're up against is if we don't do something, then we run the risk of KHP moving on to a different partner, or potentially moving on to a different location.
So is that because of the legislative session? Okay.
So I know there was time sensitivity from the Kansas Highway Patrol just because they wanted to get this done. I don't know if that pressure comes from the statute or if it comes from something else, but I do know there was some pressure to try and get this done as quickly as possible. And that's why we're considering bringing an MOU to you in the next 2 weeks to say that it is our intent to move forward with this in order to try and secure that funding past fiscal year 27.
I think I also would like to make the commission aware that, and I don't have any of the specific details, but we can provide that and get into some more information about it. But there was conversation and exploration as it relates to other potential sites and the feasibility of those, and looking at all the operational needs as it relates to this specific project. Things began to dwindle down to this was the most appropriate facility. But again, I don't want to talk about what those details were, but I think we could provide more information.
Okay, thank you, Carl.
Just an offbeat question. How many hours a year do they fly up?
I don't have that with me right now. Obviously, aircraft have specific hours in which they can operate. Pilots have specific hours in which they can operate. The maintenance of the aircraft. We're always pushing to get the aircraft airborne to meet our needs, and it's something that I have to manage with my staff almost on a weekly basis. So we get to kind of address it without giving you specifics. We work very hard to keep the aircraft airborne as often as we can.
Lindsay, I just want to make sure, because when we talked about this a few months ago, we were comparing it to the state psych hospital model of how we did that. This is different though, because this will always be a county facility. We will not transfer it to the state.
Correct. And then one thing, I mentioned it before, but I want to be clear. My understanding is potentially at the end of the 50-year ground lease, the property could revert to ownership by the Wichita Airport
Oh, you did
Authority.
say that, yes.
So
and I would imagine that
would be also a little bit different than some of our other things. And you think about Exploration Place, we have a ground lease with Wichita on that in, I think, 2047-ish. That reverts to ownership by the city of Wichita. So there are some nuances to this that are unique. And yes, if Kansas Highway Patrol ever does decide to move, it's still our hangar at the end of the
it's
day.
another building that the county will.
Yes, and we will have to pay the property insurance on it.
Do
We
roof
will,
maintenance.
correct. All of that will be our responsibility.
And Tom, I wanted to supplement and just note that on the state psychiatric hospital, a difference there was that the money, the ARPA money and the state general fund money out of 2 budget years was made available before we entered into binding agreements. We didn't have any contingent budget allocations from the legislature that we were waiting on in that project. Of course, at the MOU stage, we didn't know all of that, but we weren't contractually bound. So that is a slight difference as well.
Okay, Commissioner Matthew.
Yeah, thank you, Colonel. You answered the question that I was going to comment. It seems like there's been a lot of research and analysis and surrounding airfields. I'm sure Augusta was looked at, and Newton, and all the options, and they arrived at this. And I know we've had a lot of discussion, not necessarily an open meeting like we're having right now, but one-on-one and talking to the sheriff and talking to Don Leonard at the Highway Patrol and a few others. So it sounds like there's been a lot of analysis done, and this is what they've arrived at. And so I am supportive of this, taking our next step and doing our further diligence to try to see if we can clean up. I do agree. I'm very familiar. 50-year leases on land lease at the airport authority is what they do. WSU Tech just signed one for a massive expansion there. And the same kind of the board was like, well, wait a minute, 50 years and it's Yingling and everybody out at Jabara, out at Eisenhower, they're all on 50-year ground leases. So I think it outlives us, but I think the previous ones then they renew another 50 years and life goes on, so to speak, those that are living at the time. So anyway, I'm in favor of us moving forward. I think it's a good part. If we can get the city to help, obviously that would be helpful, but got a new manager over there, and I think this is another case where maybe even the city council and the mayor's not even aware of this. I would call it opportunity.
And I certainly wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the city by any means, but I will tell you that they also have a tactical flight officer that is part of this project and is flying with KHP and starts with us. So this is a joint effort with Wichita Police Department and the Sheriff's Office and Kansas Highway Patrol. But I wouldn't, again, want to speak about the city's intent.
That's helpful. Okay, in my view, we got two veins here. One is we have the public safety component. I think, Colonel, you have made the case in my mind that this is a necessary component to our public safety ecosystem, the air support. The sheriff has also in conversations made a significant case to me that this is a significant part of public safety, that we cannot lose these programs, and to know that there might be a risk, that this is not guaranteed that KHP is going to anchor here. That is a public safety component that convinces me that we need to have the second conversation on the financial piece. Obviously, we have a $30,000 expenditure right now for the sheriff's office. I would love to find a way that this be net neutral. I think based on the information that I was provided, I think that there is a way to do that. And I think we got to figure out the utility payments and things of that sort. The property taxes being exempt is important. I think that there's a way we can find this to be a net neutral for the county. Aside from the debt finance that we're going to have to absorb. My seat, $8 million to make sure we have KHP's hangar here for public safety, knowing that they're flying every single day. I think that the constituents of Sedgwick County would see that as a viable investment into what we have here. I don't like that we don't own the building or the land, but I understand the nature of that relationship. And that's just the way business is going to have to be done with that. So I get it. What do you need now from us, or in 2 weeks from us? What is it you're going to ask of us? An MOU is what we're going to be asked to provide?
So in the short term, yes, that is, I think, what the Kansas Highway Patrol has asked us to help draft, for them to show that there is an intention to be able to take that to the legislature and secure funding. Once we have that, we'll need to move quickly to do a CIP amendment to add this structure to our plans, and obviously do a project authorization and all of the things that are necessary with bond financing. We'll need to clarify whether this can or cannot be normal general obligation debt or public building commission debt.
Okay.
And so there will be some additional steps that we'll have to jump through, and some hoops we'll need to work through again with Wichita Airport Authority just to do a letter of intent and then figure out what they will require from us. So there will likely be a lot of paperwork over time, but the short term is just the MOU.
For me, a couple of things I'd like to see. One, let's see if we can figure out a deal with the Wichita Airport Authority to see if there's some help we can get there. Number one, with the city of Wichita. Two, the financial analysis, see if we can get a little bit more exact financial analysis, particularly on the utility piece and things of that sort. Those are the two pieces of information that I'd like to be able to see before we get an MOU, and see if we can work through the MOU. Is there anything else that anybody else thinks they need to see outside of that?
Just one thing I want to throw on there. You know, when we were on the Wichita City Council and we acted as the airport authority, and I was on a committee where when we come up on the 50-year leases and work with them with the value and stuff. And I think it's a very fair process, but to your point, I'd like to have Wichita have a little bit of partnership in this, just because they are the airport authority as well.
Yeah, I think those conversations did initially try to take place, from my understanding, and there wasn't a whole lot of traction.
I have no problem reaching out to the manager or to Jesse out at the airport.
Yeah.
I do think politically that the commission ought to reach out to the council at some point.
Yeah.
They need to
Be aware of what's happening here. Yeah. Okay. And I'm happy to take the lead and ask the mayor to make sure they're aware. Anything else? Okay, I think everybody's got their marching orders. Colonel, thanks for being here. It's really helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, Tom.
Okay, Chantel, you're up.
Chantel, welcome. Glad you're here.
All right, thank you. Okay, so Chantel Westbrook with ComCare and giving an update on where things are at with Second Light. So we have been, things have been going really well as far as the services that have gotten started and so forth. And as just a little bit of a reminder, the facility houses 170 for shelter, and then during the winter months, an additional 125 for overnight shelter. We have been having our care coordinators there. That has been working out really well. And then also funding 2 positions from Mental Health Association to be able to provide full-time, so 2 full-time through Mental Health Association, 1 clinical therapist and 1 case manager. And they have filled those they will begin January 19th. Now, right now they're filling in and doing a lot of, they have different people filling in. So they're still providing those services, but the actual positions will be filled as of January 19th. So I think that's really positive. So there are services being provided. That part is going well, but until further construction and things occur, there wouldn't be a lot more. Now, the upstairs part, if you're familiar with that property at 1025 North Main, the old Park Elementary School, that second floor will be opening on January 19th. So they would be able to have office space. There's a little bit more flexibility. More partners will be able to come in as of January 19th. So I think that's really positive. What is the contract kind of being considered is for the construction space that would be occurring on the first floor that would allow for more services, allow ComCare and our collaboration with MHA to be able to do a lot more. There is obviously a cost to that. And what's being proposed is for the county to pay 37.25% of the 1.1 million for that construction, that renovation costs. The remaining, the other portion of that would need to be privately funded, and that obviously we wouldn't do our part unless that's secured on the other. And those talks are still occurring. So from my understanding, kind of the month of January, there's going to be more conversations, meetings with Via Christi, with Wesley, basically that the remainder of that would need to be funded privately. Not secured yet, but a lot of conversations have already been occurring and are scheduled to be occurring. So one thing I thought would be of interest is that space that is being renovated. So what would be kind of that ComCare, that mental health space would be a de-escalation room, 2 meeting rooms, or could be used for telehealth. So 2 spaces, and then 25% of what's called the respite space. So the respite space would be for those that are not able to, there's an issue of some sort and they're not able to really be in the main room. They need some time to cool down, trying to or they may have some health issues and things like that. So what the thought was about 25% of that we could justify from a mental health perspective. And so that's where that 37.25% came from.
Chantel, that's helpful. If it's okay, I'll add a little context.
Please, yeah.
Mm-hmm. As the county's representative on the homelessness task force and the one who's gone to the Justice Together meetings and things of that sort, there was always a public request and not a formal request, but even a City of Wichita conversation around the county's role at Second Light and homeless services. And from my seat on the homelessness task force, we continued to be adamant that the county's role in homeless services was centered around ComCare's work around mental health, that we wanted to really funnel to not just write checks for operations of Second Light, but to really funnel all the work that we do in homeless services through the services we provide through ComCare. Is we felt like that was our niche. We felt like that was the vein in which we were to participate, and it was most appropriate to leverage that. So what's happening here at Second Light is building out the mental health, behavioral health space, medical services, mental health service, things of that sort. And the reason why there's funky math on here and 37.25% of that space being funded is because the idea is that this won't be funded with county general funds or property tax dollars. It's going to be funded through CCBHC dollars. And in order to do that, it has to qualify for CCBHC as what we've been approved by the state of Kansas to perform these services. So these aren't property tax dollars. This isn't general fund dollars, not contingency dollars. These are CCBHC dollars that are generated through the fees generated through ComCare performing its services. So would somebody be able to, for the public's understanding, what is our current balance in the CCBHC revenues? Again, that are designed through, this is fee generated income, correct, Chantel?
Yes. We provide services to the community and then we're paid for those services. And then the idea is obviously to use any of our revenue for those services, to continue serving, to expand services in any array of mental health. Again, total focus on mental health
piece
right.
of it. Lindsay, do you know the balance in the CCBHC funds?
So I can't speak to the CCBHC specifically, but at the end, this is from the report that's posted out on our website, the third quarter financial report. The balance in this fund as of, let's see, September 30th, 2025 was $30.9 million.
Yeah. The idea here is that these dollars are to be invested back into the community. That's why the CCBHC model with the state of Kansas was they would put a fee structure together, reimbursement rate together to utilize those dollars to get put back into the population, into the community. So in my view, and the reason why I think the genesis of this conversation was that our role in homeless services is the mental behavioral health piece through ComCare with the state relationship with the fees that are generated and the reimbursement rate generated, that this is one sensical way that we can utilize those funds to help the entire homeless ecosystem. And last point before we open up for questions, in my view, that if there is not an adequate and intentional effort around mental and behavioral services in the homeless community, that this entire homeless effort that's happening around Second Light, in my view, will be in vain. There has to be a mental health component to homeless services, or we will never reverse this trajectory that we're on. So it's that important. I think the county does have a role through ComCare. Questions on any of this stuff? Okay, what is the next step on this then?
I was hoping today, and Chantel did what I wanted her to do, was just give an update. I think we wait now until the construction documents are more mature, and that the private partnership component in the 1.1 million comes to clarity, and then we come back again and be ready to take something to a DFCC meeting for approval.
Okay. So Second Light will be open for the most part in March is when the construction, the bulk of the construction will be completed. So.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for representing us on this and this whole journey we've been on. But that was very helpful to explain, and Chantel explaining what our role is, what our component is, the percentage, how we got there. That's very helpful to know. And of course, the source of funding. I can't think of a better way to help support this version of a ComCare support services. It makes a lot of sense if we can make sure we.
Yeah, anyone coming into Second Light would have access to getting into mental health services. They're going to have access when they come in to, if they're already in services somewhere, we're going to help coordinate what their next steps are and keep the coordination so that they can strengthen what they're currently doing. If they're not in mental health services and they need that, then obviously our goal is to get them into services in whatever capacity they need. So it is a really nice model that when you come in, you have access right there on the campus to services, and then also having that space that would be for meeting space or telehealth type space, gives a lot of access to lots of things.
Well, that you remind us that a word used often is wraparound services. So this now becomes really the operating center of determining what wraparound they need, and either we supply it through ComCare or we reference it out.
Right, absolutely. They would either receive through us or wherever they currently are, and we're starting some of that. But we don't have obviously the space and it's not set up yet for fully doing that, but we're doing what we can with what we have now.
Great.
Yeah.
I was actually surprised to hear that $30.9 million number. Is all of that from fees that are being charged? That doesn't sound right to me.
Not all, about 31 million so far year to date has come from those fees. But then we also have about $12 million in grant funding. So that's why I'm saying I can't give you a specific on the CCBHC portion itself. But that is the primary driver of the balance. If we're getting grant funds, we're spending the grant funds or having to return them. So most likely the majority of this is CCBHC
Grant
funding.
Funds allowed to be used for construction.
We would not be proposing to use the grant funds for construction. We would be proposing to use the CCBHC revenues generated for the same types of services that are going to be provided in this facility.
I guess just fundamentally, it bothers me a little bit to use a fee for service for a construction project. Again, I'm not saying the construction is not important. It sounds like it's very important. I feel like the building should be prepared from other sources of revenue. Those fees are for services, not to be used for something else.
The reason this would be an appropriate use is because it is structuring the space to be used to provide service. Without the space, you cannot provide the service. And we also are considering this an appropriate use because but for those services being located in Second Light, they would be provided elsewhere. So that's how we were able to tie it back from an audit perspective for this to be an appropriate use. Now, policy-wise, I'll defer to you all, obviously, but from an audit perspective, it would be appropriate.
Who is going to be the other? Again, we're doing 37.25% potentially here. And the rest is funded through, says privately funded. What does that mean exactly?
It's either going to be a hospital or it's going to be a private individual. I can't think of any other options, right? Be a Christie, Wesley, or some private benefactor donor.
Yeah.
Situation.
There are meetings happening with some private individuals and with Wesley and with Via Christi who understand the components here and have an invested interest in reducing the traffic that goes to the hospital and trying to triage on site. So they are even Wesley is at the table. Bill has been at the table and they're very interested in how they can participate on that campus.
And I think they're interested because the goal of this is to keep people out of their ERs. And that's what's in it for the hospitals. And I think that's why they're part of the discussion.
And I don't disagree with that at all. And that seems like they have a great motive to do that. I'm just wondering why if this is $409,000 to the county. This will be taken out of the $30.9 million. Is this something we just do this with a resolution? And
you would have a funding agreement with the city of Wichita, because that is, I assume, is who this check would be cut to because they are actually doing the construction cost. And you would say in that agreement how these funds are to be used. And then I assume that could just be done as a part of a normal 3-2 new business agenda item.
Do we have any future obligations to this space in terms of maintenance or operational costs or anything like that?
Not through the county, certainly not through general fund. ComCare has entered into a partnership agreement with Second Light to perform services. And then we have the 2 positions that are funding MHA that Chantel mentioned earlier, but that's through an operating agreement between ComCare and Second Light. Correct, Chantel?
Yes.
No one has mentioned to me any kind of long-term utility split or anything like that. As far as I know, this is a one-time payment for this space.
That's always been my understanding as well, that there wouldn't be the future. obligation.
I guess as we develop the resolution on this, we ought to clarify some of those details in whatever we choose to vote on here.
Agreed.
Thank you.
It's good. I would just say publicly, I want to thank you and your team at ComCare. I've heard over and over and over again that this collaboration that's happening over there is unique. It's new. The collaboration with MHA, with homeless providers that are in the network over there. This isn't something that's happened historically on this level. I have a lot of questions about what we're going to do with Center City and Open Door and what that looks like, that ComCare has a role over there right now. How that will work in transition. That's a separate conversation that we'll have to have. But I just want to thank you guys. It's been incredibly impressive to watch you work through this. You've taken the lead on so many of these things. So I just thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right.
Anything else?
Tom, anything else?
We had Chairman.
That's it. Okay. All right. See you guys tomorrow, 9 a.m.